Now, I'm just going to jump right in and start by reading this recent tweet from Variety. Leadership at Disney is pressing Hollywood creatives for movies that will bring young men ages 13 to 28, aka Gen Z, back to the brand in a meaningful way, specifically original concepts. Sources say Disney has been seeking new IPs and pitches, such as splashy global adventures and treasure hunts, as well as seasonal fare like films for the Halloween corridor. The calls come as the Star Wars machine struggles to produce any film project, and the superhero genre sheds audiences by the minute. Okay, so if this is true, and I'm going to assume it is, Variety is a rather reputable source, and I don't think they just make this up out of the blue or post it unless they actually had something. And so, operating under the assumption it's all true, this is one of the craziest things I have ever read. The company that owns Marvel and Star Wars, arguably two of the biggest male franchises of all time, they don't know how to bring in the young male audience? And let's keep in mind that, though Disney themselves did not flat out say back in the day when they purchased Marvel and then shortly thereafter Lucasfilm, they didn't say we're doing this to bring in a male audience because our audience skews heavily female with the whole Disney princess thing. They just basically said we want to broaden our appeal and increase reach and that sort of thing. However, many analysts and insiders at the time, pretty much all of them were like, well, yeah, they're obviously buying these companies because they want to bring in the male audience, especially that younger male audience who loses interest in Disney as soon as they start to grow up and are no longer as interested in the more family friendly content, which before buying Marvel and Disney was the vast majority or the bulk of what they produced, right? They mainly made family friendly animated films that your average teenage boy or 20 something young man without a family is not going to see. Anyway, instead of Disney stepping back and asking themselves, what the heck is wrong with Marvel lately? Why don't young men seem to have as much interest in it as they used to? Why did young men love Iron Man but cringe at Captain Marvel? Or instead of asking what's wrong with Star Wars, why did the past decade of us producing content fail to really capture the young male audience? When traditionally, or with the original trilogy and the prequels and the generations that grew up with them, it did amazingly well with those generations. Why was Luke Skywalker popular with young men, but Rey Skywalker isn't? So instead of reflecting on any of that, their idea is to, I guess, make some random treasure seeking adventure type movies, or to acquire or create even more IPs that they'll ruin in the long run, which is exactly what they'll end up doing because they still won't understand how to actually make movies for the male audience, which is where they did indeed go wrong with Star Wars and where they're now going wrong with Marvel. I mean, George Lucas himself has said multiple times over the years, even as recently as saying it to Ron Howard when he was brought in to save the Solo movie. But Lucas has said Star Wars was made, that he made it for, and should be made for, 12-year-old boys. He made it in the hopes that it would do everything from teach them right from wrong, encourage friendship and being a good person, and instilling a sense of purpose in young men, or to seek one out as they go out into the crazy world to try and find their place in it. And no, that certainly doesn't mean a young girl or a woman can't watch and love Star Wars made for boys. As many of you know, my wife, she loves Star Wars and other geeky things. I do a whole other channel with her where we talk about Star Wars and similar things, and we both just have a ton of fun with it. And it's absolutely amazing to have a wife who is into the same things as I am. I don't want Star Wars to just be a boys' club or anything of the sort. I am simply saying that when made that way, when trying to make it for a more male audience, when trying to speak to young men directly about the challenges that are ahead of them, as George Lucas said he was trying to do, and yes, women will face many of those same challenges, don't get me wrong, but men do sometimes face unique challenges that women do not, and vice versa. But when made with that in mind, there just seems to be something about it that works better than when trying to make it something that appeals to virtually everyone. And it is okay to make things for boys and men, the same way it is okay to make things for girls or women. I've always found it so odd that Kathleen Kennedy can say, and I'm not directly quoting her here, but she can essentially say, we made the character of Rey so that women would have an easier time getting into Star Wars, which acknowledges whether I or you even agree with this or not, but it acknowledges that she at least believes women will like something or find it easier to get into it if the protagonist is female. But that doesn't seem to be okay the other way around. Men cannot prefer to have a male protagonist. And if they even remotely begin to imply that they do, or if what they're saying could possibly be construed as, I don't enjoy Star Wars quite as much when the protagonist is female, they are demonized and called sexist. And they're apparently trying to keep women out of Star Wars, or they just hate women altogether. Even though most of the time all they're really saying is, you tried so hard to make women like this movie to fall in love with Star Wars, like they arguably tried to do with Rey, that the character itself is bad as a result, and these aren't good films in large part because of that. However, all that said, the same person who might have a problem with Rey will also acknowledge that, yes, there's always been great female characters in Star Wars, and they're perfectly fine with them. As there's been great female protagonists in other films, other more, you could call them male-oriented action-type films, and men haven't had an issue with those characters either because the intent wasn't exactly to make a point about women or to try to get women to love the film via the character they inserted. They were included to just be a part of the story, not part of an agenda. And here's the real crazy part about all of this. The numerous women out there who do enjoy Star Wars, and there are tons and tons of female fans, they enjoyed it the way it was too. They didn't need it to suddenly be entirely catered to them. They are gladly welcomed into the fan base for liking Star Wars, for being Star Wars, for being what it is. Now, would some of them maybe like more female characters? Has Star Wars been lacking in that department to a degree? Yeah, I think there could be more female protagonists from time to time. I don't think anybody is really against that. I'm not saying Star Wars needs to just be all men on screen. That would kind of suck, honestly. But women were more than able to fall in love with characters like Luke Skywalker or other characters in other similar films that, again, were indeed more for male audiences or originally intended and designed and created more for the male audience. But anyway, the real odd thing about making a concerted effort to get women to like things that, again, traditionally have been made more for the male audience, like Star Wars, is that it usually doesn't work. It usually doesn't attract more women to the property. And the women who did like it just as it was, they don't suddenly enjoy it any more than they did before. If anything, they enjoy it less and are just as disappointed with what it's become as their male fan counterparts. And sure, maybe some women or young girls got into Star Wars because of Rey, and I'm not saying that couldn't or didn't happen at all or that it's a bad thing. I'm happy you got into Star Wars because of Rey. But if you're a company like Disney who cares mainly about the bottom line or almost entirely about how much you're making, and I'll keep the math very simple here, I'm not saying this is exactly what happened, but does it make sense to, say, lose two Star Wars fans that loved Luke Skywalker to create one Star Wars fan that now loves Rey? And so, Disney, if you want a solution to your problems, if you want to capture that young male audience that seems to be avoiding you like the plague, you have to actually make movies for them. And it really ain't that hard to make movies for them. Men, believe it or not, like to see men being strong and heroic and doing cool stuff, and all the while not necessarily being put in their place by women, but, from time to time actually saving a woman and saving the day. Just to look at the action films of the 80s and 90s that I personally grew up with. They weren't all that complicated. They often just had a guy going around, kicking some ass and taking some names and saving the day and getting the girl in the end, which nowadays sounds problematic, but many of us who grew up with that sort of thing came out just fine, or so I'd like to believe. And I'm not saying we should just bring back the action hero genre of the 80s and 90s in full force, which is what they might be considering doing to a degree with this whole treasure hunting movie thing, or whatever they're going with. I'm simply saying let men have their movies and don't make them feel bad or guilty about wanting them. Don't make them feel bad about wanting to be heroic and strong and brave. But anyway, I don't want to get too much into this here and now, but I will say that that age group that was mentioned in the tweet, the 13 to 28-year-olds, well, for the past decade or more now, most of their lives, that would be, they've had everyone and everything telling them how bad they are for just being men. They've grown up in a world that's told them there's something inherently wrong with them. So if you, made movies that celebrated them instead of lecturing them, that didn't attempt to make them feel guilty or bad for simply being the way they are, they just might go and see your movies. I know it's a crazy thought, but it just might work to make movies that men actually want to see, and then they'll go and see them. Well, that is going to be all I got for you this time. It is now your turn. Take to the comments below and tell me what you think about this one. Where is the problem? Why don't men ages 13 to 28 want to go see Star Wars and Marvel anymore? Whatever the case may be, leave your comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.